Hey everyone, Coach Lee here, bringing you another video on trying to help you become the best ultra runner that you can be. And today we're going to look at deep dive into nutrition in training. In some of my recent videos on the Building the Ultra Runner series, I've already talked a little bit about nutrition in on race day, and the kind of calories and carb power, etc, etc. Now we'll do a bit more on that, because I know some of you have asked for examples, etc, and I will bring that to the table as well. However, what I wanted to focus on today was what you should be doing whilst you're training. What sort of macronutrient breakdown should you be looking at, calories, etc, etc. Now, before we get into this, there's a few things that I want to say right off the bat. Number one is I'm not a qualified nutritionist or dietitian, so therefore the scope of my practice is limited in terms of being able to prescribe meal plans, diets, supplements, all that sort of stuff. Legally, I'm not allowed to do that. So again, that's something that you should always be cautious of if you're looking at running coaches or PTs and stuff. If they aren't qualified as a nutritionist or dietitian, that they can't go and prescribe certain things. We can give you guidelines and give you advice based on what's out there in terms of research or like I said, articles, or for example, some of the stuff I'm going to go through today is what I learned on my UESCA Ultramarathon Coach qualification. The second is nutrition is highly individual. Again, I think I mentioned this in my previous video. So just because I'm going to go through these bits and pieces now, you may be an outlier to that. You may find that you get on really well with different prescriptions or different guidance to what I'm about to go through, and that's absolutely okay. If you find that you're thriving, your performance is progressing, you've got high energy and not struggling with recovery or fatigue, then obviously what you're doing is working for you. And that extends to the types of diet. I'm not really going to go into the types of different diets because they all try to achieve the same thing. Most of them are based on trying to lose weight, whether that's your Atkins, your keto, your low carb, whatever it might be. They all aim to try and achieve the same thing, which is usually losing weight through some form of calorie deficit. And the reason I brought that up is because if you're looking to improve performance for an ultramarathon, you're training to do your best at an ultramarathon, having a weight loss goal at the same time as a performance goal is very challenging to succeed at it. They're at odds with each other. We know for performance, we need carbohydrates, we need proteins, we need calories to replenish all the stores and energy that we've used in training, and obviously to aid recovery, and also just to support daily functions. However, if you have a weight loss goal where you then need to be in a calorie deficit, therefore you're not necessarily getting as much energy and recovery, potentially at risk of things like overtraining, etc. if you're really trying to push the performance. So straight away, I would say that this particular video I'm going through now, and this information is aimed at those looking to push performance, not lose weight. If you want to lose weight, in my humble opinion, you just need to be in a calorie deficit and put performance goals on hold to a degree. Doesn't mean you can't get fitter in a calorie deficit, it's just obviously more challenging to maximize your potential. So if you're looking to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit of some form, whatever diet you decide to go with. Obviously, whether you're meat eater, vegan, vegetarian, doesn't matter, the concept is still the same. And that's obviously a separate sort of entity in a separate video, and that's not what I'm really going to dig into. But I just wanted to reiterate that nutrition is very individual. So again, it takes some experimentation to truly work out what works best for you. And I'm certainly, all the stuff I'm going through now, it is not the be all and end all. As I said, if you found something works better for you, absolutely go for it. However, if you're struggling and you're not sure kind of what works, then obviously this might help you just start to develop a little bit of a plan on what you do day to day in terms of your eating and your calorie consumption. First up, I want to just go over the basics. Now, the reason I like to go through this, and this is the first thing that I go through with even all my coached athletes, to minimize stress, to minimize overthinking it, you should just be aiming to eat enough calories to support your training. So you should be eating enough that you don't constantly feel tired and fatigued, and that you don't feel that you're recovering adequately from your training. And that'll show signs such as, poor sleep, feeling constantly sore and tired all the time, performance stagnating or even going backwards, those are signs that potentially you're not getting enough calories in your training and you're not getting enough nutrient dense calories. All right, I'm a big fan of pizzas and chocolate and stuff. I've got a very sweet tooth, but obviously that needs to be in moderation. You still need to be looking at getting most of your food from healthy sources, and that's obviously common knowledge, or it should be nowadays. So realistically, you can draw a line in the sand and go, well, I just need to make sure that I'm eating enough calories to support my training. I've got a few ideas and symptoms to look out for if I'm not. And the other thing that you've got to be aware of with that is that as training volume increases, you also might need to increase your calorie intake, because obviously you're increasing the overall training load and recovery demand on your body. You may find that you need to increase your overall calories to keep up with that as well. Then on top of that, obviously just adequate hydration. 2 to 3 litres per day is a good number to shoot for. If you combine those two strategies, enough calories, enough hydration, plus adequate sleep, decent quality sleep, develop a sleep routine, that should be your basic recovery strategy. Those should be your main recovery tools outside of all the other gump that's out there, foam rollers, massage guns, compression, all that sort of jazz. If you haven't got that locked down, that's the low-hanging fruit that you should address, and that's going to maximize your performance as well. So that's the basics. You can be very successful on just that, making sure you're eating enough from decent food sources on the whole, enjoy food, have things that you like and crave when you feel like it, don't feel guilty about it. It's just food, it's not good or bad, it shouldn't be a punishment to have something that you enjoy. It's just about understanding the moderation and working out what works best for you, and that will be a bit of experimentation. There's the number one option, all right? The number two option is taking it a little bit further. If you kind of like some numbers, or you're just still not sure, well, what's enough calories for me? What's the right macro breakdown, etc.? How do I know I'm getting enough in of particular things such as carbohydrates to make sure I'm performing at my best? First of all, then you can use something like a BMR calculator or a TDEE calculator, which basically focus on a few questions such as your height, your weight, your age, your gender, and your sort of rough activity levels. And this includes work and stuff like that. So obviously, if you're working 8 to 10 hours sat down in a chair, then your activity levels will be a little bit lower, regardless of the fact that you might run, 5, 10 hours, 12 hours a week in training. You can then use those calculators to give you a rough idea of your maintenance calories and your deficit calories for fat loss and stuff like that. Obviously, if we're looking at performance, we want to be at least in that maintenance amount. So that'll at least give you a ballpark figure of how many calories per day you should be aiming to achieve. Then from there, we can then break down the macronutrients in terms of how much of each one we should be looking at. Macronutrients are carbs, proteins, and fats. We then have micronutrients, which is all your vitamins and minerals and stuff. We're not going to go too into detail on those at this point. If you're eating a balanced diet of varied foods, vegetables, all that sort of stuff, then you'll be getting a decent amount of your micronutrients as well. And if you feel that you're not, you can always look at supplementation on that as well, which we'll cover towards the end. So we've got a rough idea of calories. We can then break down the macronutrients in sort of rough amounts. Again, these are broad ranges, as you'll see, showing again how individual nutrition is, but just gives you some starting points to experiment with. So on the carbohydrate front, we're looking at if you're typically exercising up to 2 hours per day. So for most of us, that might be one run, or if we're doing a double session, like say, a couple of 5 to 10k runs, roughly around the 2 hour mark per day, then you should be looking at 5 to 7 grams of carbohydrates per kilo of body weight per day for a female. If you're a male, you're looking at 6 to 10 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight per day. So if, for example, I went to the top end of that for a male, 10 grams, I'm 80 kilos. So obviously then I would be looking at 800 grams of carbohydrates per day if I was training up to 2 hours per day. Sounds like quite a lot, but again, this might be surprising that those are the kind of levels you want, especially if you're seeking performance goals. And for me, on the carbohydrate front, I'm probably not far off doing 600, 700 per day anyway at this time. I'm probably somewhere around the 7 to 8 grams of carbs per kilo per day, and that seems to work for me at this time when I'm in kind of more moderate training loads. So that's up to 2 hours per day of training. However, if you're, again, sort of more intermediate advanced athlete, you're looking to push the boundaries even further and you're training more than 2 hours per day, and remember this, it can include gym work as well. So if you're already doing a couple of hours of running in a day and then going for a half an hour gym session, you're going past that 2 hours per day, then we obviously want to look at increasing our carbohydrate intake, and we're looking at around 8 to 12 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight per day for both genders, for both male and female. So that's your guideline of carbohydrates. As I said there, you might start at the lower ends when you're in more moderate training loads, and then maybe experiment with the higher ends when you start to push volume. Because again, if you think, like I said, if you increase volume, you're increasing training load, you're going to increase your calorie expenditure, therefore your calorie demand is also increased. And if we want to stay out of that deficit and potentially risk losing weight, then that'll affect our performance. We obviously need to then look at increasing our calorie demand as we go, and you could then either go back to those BMR calculators and increase your activity levels to then get a rough idea, or we can obviously just use those numbers off the carbohydrates and go from lower end to sort of more towards the top end and play around with how we feel day to day. And especially with carbohydrates, because we know that they are vital for increased performance and increased capacity, you'll understand whether or not you're at the sweet spot based on how you feel during those sessions. As much as we'll look at pre and post workout, you'll understand that if you're not getting enough carbohydrates in per day, you'll start to see performances struggle during those more intense sessions, and you'll also see things like brain fog and all that sort of stuff as well potentially kicking in. Moving on to protein, nice and straightforward. It's obviously valuable for recovery, valuable for reparation of, even bones, but muscles, ligaments, tendons, and obviously high impact sport of running, we need that protein. And we're looking at 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day for both genders. I tend to go more towards the top end of that at the moment, just because I'm in the gym 4 times a week. My running volume has been reduced to sort of 20 to 25 miles. I'm now in the gym 4 times a week, lifting heavy across a whole body. I'm doing a bit more of a sort of hypertrophy type routine where it's body part splits almost. So I'm more at that top end. So again, if you think about my example, 80 kilo runner, 2 grams, I'm now looking at 160 grams of protein per day. Again, you'll probably start looking at these numbers, and then if you've already been tracking your food a little bit and seeing what you're currently at, you probably find, wow, that's quite high. And rightly so. I saw a massive change in my ability to adapt and recover when I increased my protein intake. And again, getting that from just natural sources can be quite a challenge, and that's certainly my case. So again, I use a bit of supplementation to aid that through protein shakes and stuff like that. And again, I'll touch on that towards the end. So that's your protein. Then the final piece of the macronutrient puzzle is your fat. So we've got a rough amount of carbs per kilo of body weight per day. We've got a rough amount of protein per kilogram body weight per day. And that's going to give you obviously a total amount of calories. We know that for every gram of carbohydrates, it's 4 calories. And for every gram of protein, we know it's 4 calories. So you'll start to roughly, doing a bit of basic maths with those numbers, you'll then figure out how much calories is coming from carbs and from protein. You then want your fats to be the remainder of that basically. It should be around the 20 to 35% mark, depending on where you sit in those brackets of carbohydrates and proteins that I just laid out for you. Basically, the rest of your calories should then come from fat. And obviously dietary fat is again massively beneficial to performance and reparation as well. So again, for anyone that's thinking, well, I should be on a low fat diet or a low carb diet and things like that. Again, if you think you thrive on that, absolutely spot on. But if you're doing it for any other reasons because someone said that is the diet you should be on, I'd reassess those goals and also compare it to your current training and performance and how you're generally feeling. A balanced approach to those macronutrients I find is going to be much more beneficial, especially for ultra runners. So that's a rough idea of what you should be looking at in training to make sure you're maximizing your sessions, your recovery, your goals. And obviously you can use things like MyFitnessPal. There's obviously lots of other different calorie trackers to understand whether or not you're hitting those targets. And most of us are pretty much creatures of habit, in the sense that we tend to eat very similar things day to day. So if you think about it, it's only going to take a short period of time of experimentation and figuring out where you are in those gaps and whether or not you need to increase them or not before you kind of get to understand that this is now your routine of you have that meal, plus a couple of snacks, plus maybe a couple of supplements, and you're hitting those targets and feeling good. You then obviously don't necessarily need to continue tracking unless you find that helps you feel better just day to day. I kind of did it for a few weeks or so just to understand where I was. Happy with that. I was happy that the meals I was currently having was hitting those levels. I'm pretty much eating the same things on a weekly basis. So then I now just know that, well, cool, I have X amount of this, X amount of that. That will roughly give me this amount of calories plus this amount of macronutrient breakdown. That's training. That's your day-to-day stuff. Obviously, then we need to look at pre and post workout. Now, if you're going out for shorter runs and things like that, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about having a pre-workout snack or meal. But obviously, if you're going out for longer periods, I'd say at least 90 minutes to 2 hours or beyond, you want to then look at having some sort of pre-workout snack, and you want to load that up with carbohydrates. You want to be looking at somewhere between 1 to 4 grams per kilo of body weight in terms of carbohydrate content in that, and then something like 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight of protein. So just, again, these are numbers that honestly I don't think you need to really worry about too much. If you're having some sort of pre-workout snack, which is beneficial if you're doing the longer stuff to help preload glycogen stores and stuff like that and help you feel that you've got more sustained energy through the session, just have something that's got some carbohydrates in and potentially a little bit of protein. You know, things like fruit and stuff like that can obviously be a useful carbohydrate source. You might then chuck something like a nut butter on there, or even have a protein shake or something like that with some fruit. That could be an option. Obviously, the closer to the session that you are, obviously the smaller that snack's going to be. Obviously, if you're a couple of hours out from the session, it'll be almost like just having a normal meal. You might just have your lunch or your dinner before your session, or even your breakfast, depending on what flexibility you have. If you find that you're in between meals, that might be where you have a small snack or something like that half an hour before the session itself. I wouldn't overanalyze that personally. Carbohydrates is going to be the most important factor of a pre-workout, especially if it's a high intensity session, because you can then, if it's a long run or something like that, you can then focus on just getting the fuel during the session as well. You'll already have been loaded up a little bit from just your normal meals, especially from the previous 24 hours. So you can then just focus on nutrition during the long runs. It'd be more the higher intensity sessions, intervals, stuff like that, where you might want to load up a bit extra carb beforehand because you're not necessarily going to eat as much during the session. Then there's the post-workout. Now, there is supposedly a window where glycogen uptake and stuff like that is increased. Therefore, potentially, if you take advantage of that window, you might increase recovery. And that's typically between 1 to 2 hours post-workout. Now, for me personally, I've experimented with this and I've not seen any difference from having stuff immediately after the session and then having it 3 or 4 hours after the session. I've not necessarily noticed much different, and I've experimented with it quite extensively. Obviously, I'm just one individual, so that doesn't mean I'm saying that window doesn't exist. You might find that you feel much better recovered after taking some stuff immediately, and I do tend to do that anyway. It's just more so because it's convenient rather than because I think, oh, if I don't have it now, I've not recovered adequately. So you want to be aiming for something like 1.5 to 2 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight. You want to look at trying to replenish some sodium, so that could be through electrolytes, it could be through some salty foods and stuff like that. And obviously you want to then make sure you get some protein in there as well. I personally just go for things like the Science and Sport Rego, because it's a good carbohydrate protein blend. If I'm kind of looking at normal foods and stuff, again, things like fruit, protein shakes, nut butters, all that sort of stuff. Again, you probably have some options that you already enjoy taking post-workout. Again, the key concept here is that you're taking something. It doesn't have to be within the 1 to 2 hours. As long as you're having some decent replenishment of fuel post-workout, you're not just then starving yourself for the rest of the day, you're on the right track. So again, you don't have to overanalyze the post-workout, just like you don't have to for the pre-workout. As long as you're doing something along those lines and you're getting a decent amount of carbohydrates in both options and then a bit more protein in the post-workout, and then taking protein as normal throughout the day based on those numbers I gave you, you're going to be on the right track. And that's it. It doesn't need to be any more complex than that. What those foods are made up of is entirely up to you. Yes, obviously we want most of it to come from nutrient-dense foods, as I said, whole foods, minimally processed, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, what that looks like is down to you as the individual, what you already have, what you enjoy, what works for you. Whether you're meat eater, vegetarian, vegan, it doesn't matter. Those numbers can still apply, and you just get it from the sources that your diet allows for. But other than that, the world's your oyster in terms of how you make up those numbers and those overall calories and stuff. The main concept, like I said at the very start, is you're eating enough calories to support your training and you're not feeling knackered all the time. You're drinking enough water and you're getting some extra bits in post-workout, especially if it's a hard session or a long run. You're on the right track. Then from there, the last piece then is supplementation. Again, as part of my qualification, I can't say you need to take this supplement, you need to take that, which I wouldn't want to anyway, because again, nutrition is individual. Some people may use them, some people may not feel like they need them, some people thrive on them, some people don't see any difference. For me personally, again, this is just my own experience. I'm not saying that you should follow this. I take 3. I take a multivitamin, just because things like vitamin D and stuff obviously tend to be quite low in people who live in the UK and other places where you don't maybe get as much sunlight, especially over winter time. I found that's helped me as well because it's got a bit of magnesium in there and stuff, helps me with my sleep. I take fish oils or omega-3s because it's good for brain health, heart health, and I found that even things like my knees and stuff when I'm squatting heavy and stuff like that tend to deal better with the volume and the weight and stuff like that I'm doing in those sessions. And then I take a protein shake. At the moment I'm using a plant-based protein from Awesome Supplements, and that's purely just because it tastes nice. I'm not because I'm a vegan or anything like that, you know, just because I do like meat doesn't mean I can't get a lot of plant-based sources and stuff like that anyway. And I do that purely just so I can hit those high protein requirements, because otherwise I've got to eat so much more extra in my meals, which for me, I struggle with. So, and they're the only 3 that I take. Every now and again, I might cycle a bit of creatine in there when I'm in my high levels of gym training. The jury's out in terms of its benefits for ultra runners, and I'm kind of keeping my eye out on the research and stuff like that, especially people like Jason Cooper are obviously presenting a few things on that at the moment. But for me at the moment, those are the only supplements I take. And like I said, you might find that you're getting enough vitamin D's and all that sort of stuff from just your general diet. You might find that you don't need omega-3s because you eat a lot of fish, because obviously a lot of oily fish and stuff are high in omega-3s. And you might find that you get enough protein from your normal diet, so you don't necessarily need those supplements. Again, those are the ones that I take. Those are ones that I personally would probably say the only effective ones other than creatine, because that's the kind of most researched supplement out there and shown to be effective on a lot of different scenarios. But things like BCAAs and all that sort of stuff are a waste of time. They're just flavoured water, in my opinion, and the research kind of backs it up. So I don't bother with any of that sort of stuff, or pre-workouts and things like that. And that's it. I'm not going to blabber on anymore. How long we've been going? 22 minutes, quite a long time. But that's nutrition and training. All right. Any questions, any comments for this, let me know. Like I said, I will do another race day nutrition one and break that down a bit more in terms of quantities of food and all that sort of stuff. The next video I'm going to put together though is a little breakdown of the key training runs for ultramarathon. All right. And there's only 5 of them. Okay. So look forward to that in the next video. If there's any content that you do want me to record, please just drop me an email, lee@ultramarathonccoach.co.uk, or in the comments below. If you want to get my free weekly coaching emails, look in the description for this video and sign up to my coaching emails. You'll also get a little ultramarathon guidebook with that as well. And don't forget, we've got the Break Your Boundaries online ultramarathon club, and again the link is in the description if you want to have a look at what that's all about. And again, it's a great resource to help you complete your first ultra or start pushing performance and breaking those boundaries. Thanks for everyone. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, share it with friends, and I'll see you in the next one.